Today's first reading from the prophet Isaiah says many things that are not surprising to us, such as, I have not rebelled, I have not turned back. The Lord my God is my help, therefore I am not disgraced, I shall not be put to shame. But the very same passage also says one thing that seems to contradict that, and it seems to say that he will be put to shame. I will give my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who plucked my beard. My face I did not shield from buffets and spitting. Also in the 53rd chapter of the prophet Isaiah, the Messiah is described in this way: like a lamb led to slaughter, or a sheep silent before shearers, he did not open his mouth. Seized and condemned, he was taken away. Who would have thought any more of his destiny? For he was cut off from the land of the living and smitten for the sin of his people. So let's contrast Jesus then with the prophet Muhammad. Muhammad was probably the second most influential person who has ever lived next to Jesus. Currently, there's like 2.4 billion Christians in the world, 2 billion Muslims. And Muhammad questioned how God could let his Messiah be disgraced. He argued in the Quran that Jesus was a true prophet and could not possibly have been disgraced and crucified, as the gospel proclaims, because Allah would not have let one of his prophets be publicly put to shame. Because prophets have to be winners, not losers. Muhammad himself, he was a winner, not a loser as a warrior. He spread his religion not only by successful preaching, but also by successful warfare. Unlike Jesus, he was never arrested, tried, convicted, or crucified. He wasn't put to shame. But sometimes, success in the eyes of the world is shame in the eyes of God. And shame in the eyes of the fallen world is success and glory at times in the eyes of God. So let's fast forward to today's gospel, the text of the day. Interestingly enough, our first pope, Peter, he had the same mindset of Muhammad when he tried to correct Jesus' course away from the cross. And this was one of the stupidest things that Peter ever said. And it happened right after Peter said one of the wisest things he ever said when he said to Jesus, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus affirms him, calling him blessed. Then says that you are the rock upon which I will build my church. And this no doubt lifted Peter up very high, but he was brought down as far as he was lifted up soon afterwards. Jesus had just told Peter that he would have to suffer and be rejected, disgraced, and crucified. Peter took him aside, tried to correct him, saying, "Lord, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are God's definitive revelation to the world. This shame cannot happen to you. I will not let it happen. I will defend you by the sword, if necessary." Which is exactly what Peter tried to do when Jesus was arrested at the Garden of Gethsemane. He took out his sword, cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. Then Jesus ended the most just war in history and healed its one and only casualty, and told Peter to put his sword into his sheath, because all who take the sword shall die by the sword. Then, of course, Peter denies during the Passion knowing the Lord, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And afterwards he goes out and he weeps bitterly. After the resurrection, Jesus encounters Peter on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he gave Peter 3 times to do his denial. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. And Jesus predicts that Peter would come to know that love, live in that love, and die for that love. Jesus predicted Peter's cross and martyrdom. Muhammad and Peter made the same mistake, thinking that God would never manifest himself in shame, suffering, and loss. They were thinking God would only manifest himself in gain, glory, and joy. The scandal that God himself would be shamed, suffer, and die was unthinkable for them. What makes it thinkable? Well, Jesus does. Jesus is the definitive revelation of who God is and who we are called to be as human beings. He is the real deal. And the real deal includes taking up your cross, making light of its shame, marching up to Calvary and to death. He was a winner, not a loser. He won victory not by avoiding the shame and the suffering, the cross and the death, but by embracing it and transforming it into redemption, into glory. You know, during the singing of the Anima Christi after Holy Communion, one of the lines we sing, within your wounds, hide me. If we are truly committed Catholics, Christians, disciples of Jesus, we are not only with Jesus, but we are in him. We are members of his body. And therefore, we also must take up our cross and follow him through the shame, the suffering, the cross, to the glory and the joy of the resurrection and eternal life. And this necessarily means that we're called to give ourselves away. Ultimately, it's the only way to live. To grasp your life, to hold on to it, to grasp the stuff in your life, to live for yourself, ultimately leads to your soul shriveling and dying. Jesus did not live for himself. He lived for the Father. And he lived not for himself, he lived for us, embracing the shame, suffering, and death to bring us salvation. You know, the great truth of the gospel, the great paradox of life is this: dying to your selfish self is truly living. That giving your whole self away is truly gaining your whole self. That the way to discover joy is to give joy away. You know, we're meant to be like the Sea of Galilee, not the Dead Sea. The same water, the Jordan River, flows into the Sea of Galilee and into the Dead Sea. But the Sea of Galilee is alive with fish and fishermen today, 2,000 years after Jesus was there, while the Dead Sea lives up to its name. It's dead. No fish can survive within its waters. Why? Because the Sea of Galilee not only receives the fresh water from the Jordan River at its inlet, but it also gives it away at its outlet, where it flows into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has an inlet where it receives the fresh water, but no outlet. And that's why the waters are dead. That is true of our spiritual lives as well as our rivers. So this gospel text, you know, our first reading, even our second reading, invites us to ask the all-important question: am I spiritually alive or am I dead? Am I denying myself, taking up my crosses, and following the path of Jesus?